The story, Gold or Stone. A young man burdened with sorrow came to visit a wise old sage. His eyes were clouded with frustration as he poured out his heart. My life feels so unfair. No matter how hard I try, people ignore me. My talents go unnoticed, and fate seems to have abandoned me. Why do others get to shine while I remain hidden in the shadows? The sage said nothing. Instead, he bent down and picked up an ordinary stone from the ground. Without a word, he tossed it into a pile of rocks nearby and said gently, "Now, find the stone I just threw." The young man stared into the heap of nearly identical stones, puzzled and unsure. I can't. They all look the same." The old man smiled, then quietly removed the gold ring from his finger and tossed it into the same pile. "Now, try to find this one." Within seconds, the young man reached in and retrieved the gleaming gold ring. The sage looked at him, his gaze kind but piercing. "You see, if you're just another stone among many, don't be surprised when no one notices. But if you shape yourself into gold, if you polish your soul and refine your character, then no matter where you are, among a crowd or in hardship, you will stand out. You will be seen. You will be valued." Message: don't expect the world to recognize your worth if you haven't yet forged yourself into something worthy. Life does not reward based on how you feel. It responds to how much you've grown, endured, and worked. Stop blaming fate. Instead, begin the daily work of shaping yourself into gold. For only when you change will your destiny change. The story, The Birdcage. John and George once made a peculiar bet. John confidently declared, "If I give you a birdcage and you hang it somewhere visible in your living room, you will eventually end up buying a bird." George, amused, shook his head and replied, "No way. Taking care of a bird is a hassle. I'm not getting one." Determined to prove his point, John went out and bought George a beautiful birdcage, elegantly crafted, shiny, and eye-catching. Out of curiosity and perhaps a hint of politeness, George hung it in the most prominent spot of his living room, thinking little of it. But soon, every time someone visited, the questions began. "Hey, George, when did your bird die?" "I've never had a bird," George would reply, puzzled. "Then, why do you have a bird cage hanging there?" The question was always the same, and it came with raised eyebrows, confused looks, and sometimes even judgmental tones. Some visitors made comments about how cold-hearted it seemed to keep an empty cage, like a symbol of neglect. Others simply stared, visibly wondering why anyone would own a cage without a bird. George found himself constantly explaining. Again and again, he had to defend a choice he hadn't really thought through. And slowly, the pressure mounted. Not because he wanted a bird, but because justifying the emptiness of the cage became exhausting. Eventually, George gave in. He went to a pet store and bought a small, chirping bird. Placing it in the cage felt oddly relieving. The questions stopped. The looks vanished. And George realized something strange. It was far easier to put a bird in the cage than to keep explaining why it was empty. People are like that too. Often, we hang invisible cages in our minds, symbols of ambition, identity, status, or purpose, without knowing what we're supposed to place inside. But once those cages are out in the open, once others start to see them, the pressure to fill them can become overwhelming. We act not out of desire, but out of expectation. Not because we want to, but because we're tired of explaining why we haven't. Message: humans often create mental cages, symbols of who we should be or what we should have, without understanding what they truly mean. When those cages become visible to others, we may feel compelled to fill them just to avoid judgment or misunderstanding. True freedom isn't about how beautiful the cage is, but whether you needed one at all. The story, The Brick and the Stone. Legend has it that when Laozi was riding his blue ox through the Hanggu Pass, he encountered an old man with silver hair, said to be over 100 years old. The elderly man respectfully bowed to Laozi and said, "I've heard of your vast wisdom and deep understanding. May I ask for your guidance on a matter?" He then proudly continued, "I am now 106 years old. Honestly, I've lived a life of leisure since my youth. My peers, those who worked tirelessly, are all gone. They tilled vast fields and owned endless farmlands, yet in the end, they left with nothing. Some helped build the Great Wall, but never tasted the glory it promised. Others constructed 4 grand houses, only to be buried in lonely graves on the outskirts. But I, who never planted nor harvested, still had grain to eat. I never laid a single brick, yet I've always had a roof to keep out the wind and rain. So tell me, master, may I now laugh at their hard and busy lives, even if it means I might die a little younger?" Laozi smiled gently and said, "Please bring me a brick and a stone." When the two objects were placed before them, Laozi turned to the old man and said, "If you had to choose one, sir, would you take the brick or the stone?" The old man quickly picked up the brick and placed it before himself, saying confidently, "Of course I'd choose the brick." Laozi asked, "And why is that?" Pointing to the stone, the old man explained, "The stone has no corners or edges. It's practically useless. But the brick, well, that can be used for building, for something real." Laozi turned to the gathering crowd and asked, "And what would you all choose, the brick or the stone?" Everyone chose the brick. Laozi then looked back at the old man and asked, "Which one lasts longer, the stone or the brick?" The old man replied, "The stone, obviously." Laozi calmly nodded and said, "Indeed, the stone lives longer, yet no one chooses it. The brick has a shorter life, but everyone selects it because it serves a purpose. So it is with all things in life. That which may not endure long, but is useful, is cherished, remembered, and chosen. But that which endures yet serves no purpose is forgotten, dismissed, and left behind. Thus the long-lasting becomes short-lived in memory, and the brief can become eternal in meaning." Hearing this, the old man felt deeply ashamed. Message: a life of ease may seem long and comfortable, but it may not hold meaning. What gives life its value is not its length, but its usefulness and impact. Like the brick and the stone, it's not about how long something lasts, but how much it serves. Purpose gives weight to existence. Without it, even the longest life may be forgotten. The story: Two Travelers and the Axe. Two men were walking together along a country road when one of them spotted something lying on the ground. He bent down, picked it up, and exclaimed excitedly, "Look what I've found! A sharp, fine axe!" His companion frowned and gently corrected him. "You mean we found it? Since we're traveling together, it should belong to both of us." But the man holding the axe shook his head stubbornly. "No, I found it. It's mine." They continued walking, the man proudly carrying the axe by himself. But soon, a third man appeared, angry and breathless. He pointed directly at the one holding the axe and shouted, "That's my axe! You stole it!" The accused turned quickly to his companion and whispered in panic, "We're in trouble now." But the companion calmly replied, "You can't say we now. You were the one who found the axe, so it's you who's in trouble." Message: if you refuse to share the rewards, don't expect others to share your burdens. A person who claims credit alone should be prepared to face consequences alone. True partnership means sharing both gain and risk. The story: This is not heaven. After a long life of devotion, a pastor passed away and was led to what he believed was heaven. The place was breathtakingly beautiful. He was shown into a grand, luxurious room where anything he desired appeared instantly. If he felt hungry, a servant would bring exquisite meals. If he was thirsty, even before the thought fully formed, a drink would be placed before him. Everything was flawless, effortless, immediate. At first, the pastor felt pure joy. But after a few days, that joy began to fade. There was nothing to do, no sermons to preach, no church to care for, no souls to guide, just sitting and receiving. He began to feel uneasy, even restless. One day, a servant appeared and asked, "What would you like now?" The pastor hesitated. "I don't really need anything. I'm not hungry or thirsty. I can't keep sitting here. I need something to do." The servant replied, "But why are you dissatisfied? Every desire has been fulfilled. What more could you want?" What had once felt like paradise now felt suffocating. The pastor frowned and snapped. "You call this heaven?" The servant calmly answered, "Who told you this was heaven? This is hell." And in that moment, the pastor understood. A life without purpose, without work, without struggle or meaning, that is true hell. It wasn't fire or torment that made it unbearable. It was idleness. Message: heaven isn't where all is given. It's where your purpose lives. A life without work, challenge, or direction may seem restful at first, but quickly becomes a prison. Fulfillment is found not in comfort, but in the meaning we create through what we do. The story: The Lightning Flash. One dark and stormy night, a philosopher known for his deep reasoning and a common man found themselves lost in a dense and dangerous forest. The woods were full of wild beasts, and the darkness was overwhelming. As they struggled to find their way, the sky began to rumble with thunder. Suddenly, a lightning bolt tore through the heavy clouds, casting a brilliant flash of light across the forest. In that fleeting instant, the philosopher looked up to analyze the sky, absorbed in thought. But the common man looked down, at the ground, at the path ahead, and then, just as quickly as it appeared, the lightning vanished. Message: opportunities often come like a flash, brief, sudden, and gone in an instant. Those who focus too much on analyzing the moment may miss the path it briefly reveals. Sometimes, wisdom lies not in looking above, but in looking ahead, being ready to act when life lights the way. The story: The Three Travelers. Three travelers checked into a hotel and set out early the next morning. The first carried an umbrella, the second a walking stick, and the third carried nothing at all. Not long after they began their journey, a heavy rainstorm struck. That evening, they returned to the hotel, one soaking wet, one bruised and battered, and the last one completely unharmed. Baffled, the two injured men questioned the third. "You didn't have an umbrella or a walking stick. How are you the only one who's fine?" The third traveler replied with a question to the first: "Why did you get wet but not injured?" The man with the umbrella answered, "When the rain began, I relied on my umbrella and kept walking. I didn't expect strong winds, which made the umbrella useless. That's how I got drenched. Later, when we reached the muddy road, since I didn't have a stick, I stepped carefully, testing the ground before moving forward, so I avoided injury." The third traveler turned to the man with the walking stick. "And you? Why weren't you wet, but ended up hurt?" He responded, "Since I had no umbrella, I sought shelter when the rain began, so I stayed dry. But when we got to the muddy path, I trusted my stick too much, used it to move quickly, and kept falling." The third traveler smiled. "And that's exactly why I made it back safe. I sought shelter from the rain and moved cautiously through difficult paths. I didn't depend on tools. I stayed alert. Your mistake was over-relying on what you had, thinking they guaranteed your safety." Message: tools can help, but they're not a substitute for awareness and caution. Overconfidence in what we possess often leads us to neglect thoughtfulness and prudence. True safety lies not in what we carry, but in how wisely we use our judgment. The story: A Small Task. A man wanted to hang a large painting on the wall in his living room, so he invited his neighbor over to lend a hand. After they temporarily fixed the painting to the wall, the neighbor observed, "It doesn't look quite right. It would look much better with a wooden frame." The man agreed and asked his neighbor to help find some wood for the frame. After gathering the wood and preparing to hammer the pieces together, the neighbor interrupted again. "Hold on, this piece is too long. We need to saw it down a bit." He fetched a saw, but after just a few pulls, he complained, "This saw is too dull. I need to sharpen it." So he went home to look for a file. But when he found it, he realized the file's handle was missing, which made it hard to grip. He went out to search for a suitable tree branch to make a new handle. But before he could cut the branch, he needed to sharpen his axe. To do that, he needed to secure the sharpening stone properly. That meant building a support for the stone, and for that, he'd need a proper carpenter's bench. But since he didn't have all the necessary tools, he left to borrow them from someone in the village. Hours passed, and he never came back. Eventually, the man hung the painting on his own. That evening, he bumped into his neighbor again, who was now helping a carpenter transport a bulky electric saw from a hardware store. Message: in life, we all face many choices and paths, but some people get lost in a maze of distractions, constantly busy, yet never making progress. They seem endlessly occupied, but deep down, even they don't know what they're actually doing. Be careful not to let endless preparation become a substitute for real action. The story: Regret. There was once a famous monk, revered for his devotion and spiritual discipline. When he died, people widely believed he had attained enlightenment and praised him as a saint. That very same day, a well-known prostitute also passed away. She had lived across from the monk's temple. They were neighbors. Two angels were sent, one to escort the monk to heaven, the other to take the prostitute to hell. Upon arriving at the gates of heaven, however, St. Peter stopped them. "You've come to the wrong place," he said. "Take the monk to hell and bring the woman here to heaven." The angel was stunned. "But surely, that's a mistake. He was a respected monk who spent his life in prayer and meditation. We didn't even question it. As for the woman, her sins were clear." St. Peter shook his head. "You judged by appearances and missed the truth. The monk prayed and meditated outwardly, but inside, his heart was filled with conflict and desire. Each day he watched the woman across the street and thought, 'She's beautiful. If I just crossed the street, she could be mine. What am I doing here, pretending to be holy, endlessly begging a silent God, getting nothing in return?' It wasn't virtue that kept him away. It was fear of losing his reputation. He wasn't a man of peace. He was a man of torment. He denied his urges not from wisdom, but from cowardice. He didn't rise above temptation. He only hid from it. The woman, on the other hand, lived in sin but looked toward redemption. Every day she sat and stared at the temple with longing, not for the monk, but for forgiveness, for a chance to step into the holy place. She never dared enter, believing herself unworthy. She knew she was wasting her life, selling her body and soul, but she was filled with sorrow, and in her heart she truly repented. That, St. Peter said, is real stillness. That is real prayer. Her regret came from the soul. His came from fear. Take her to heaven, send him to hell. Their appearances were different, their hearts even more so. Both were filled with regret, but only one truly wanted to be saved. Message: true virtue is not in how we appear, but in what we carry within. Outward holiness means little if it hides inner deceit. But even a stained soul can be redeemed if it longs for the light. What matters is not the life we've lived, but the truth we're willing to face. The story, a sincere lesson. During a lecture on management, a professor stood before his students and said, "Let's begin with a simple experiment." He took out a large empty jar and began placing big stones into it one by one until no more could fit. Then he turned to the class and asked, "Is the jar full now?" The students replied, "Yes, it's full." The professor smiled, then picked up a container of small pebbles. He poured them in, gently shaking the jar so the pebbles could slip into the spaces between the larger stones. When it could hold no more, he asked, "How about now? Is it full?" Some students, more cautious now, said, "Maybe not yet." The professor then took a bag of sand and poured it into the jar. The fine grains filled all the tiny gaps. He asked again, "Now is it full?" This time the entire class replied in unison, "Not yet." Smiling, the professor took out a bottle of water and slowly poured it into the jar until it reached the brim. Then he looked around the room and asked, "What does this example teach us?" One eager student responded, "It shows that no matter how carefully you plan, there's always room for improvement." The professor shook his head. "That's not quite right," he said. "This experiment teaches us one thing. If you don't put the big stones in first, you'll never be able to fit them in later. The big stones represent the most important things in your life: your time with loved ones, your values, your dreams, your education, your passions, your health. Whatever they are, they must come first. Fill your life with small, trivial things, and you'll never have room for what truly matters. Message: in life, know what your big stones are and put them in first. Make space for what matters most before it's too late. Everything else can wait. The story, the joy of fish. Zhuangzi and Huizi were strolling together across the Hao Bridge. As they paused and gazed down into the clear water below, Zhuangzi watched the fish swimming freely and remarked, "Look at those fish. How leisurely and joyful they seem, gliding through the water." Huizi turned to him and asked, "You are not a fish. How can you possibly know whether fish are happy or not?" Zhuangzi smiled and replied, "And you are not me, so how do you know that I don't know the joy of fish?" Message: understanding doesn't always come from logic or direct experience. Sometimes it flows from connection, empathy, and quiet observation. Not everything needs to be proven to be known. Some truths are felt, not measured. The story. Which leg first? A philosophical frog once watched a centipede walking gracefully, its dozens of legs moving in harmony. The frog was utterly fascinated. I struggle to walk on just 4 legs, he thought. How does a centipede manage with hundreds? How can it possibly decide which leg moves first, then next, and so on? The more he pondered, the more bewildered he became. Finally, unable to resist his curiosity, he stopped the centipede and asked, I'm a philosopher, and there's a mystery I can't figure out. You have so many legs. How do you know which one to move first? Then which one next? With so many legs, how can you even take a step without getting tangled? The centipede paused, surprised. No one's ever asked me that before, it said. I've just always walked. I've never thought about it. But now that you ask, let me try to figure it out. And for the first time in its life, the centipede began to think deeply about how it walked. It tried to analyze which leg went first and how they followed in sequence. Minutes passed. It stood completely still. Then it wobbled, lost its balance, and collapsed. Maybe you should go ask another centipede, it said weakly. All my life I've just walked, and it worked fine. But now, after thinking about it too hard, I can't move at all. Every leg wants to step at the same time, and now I'm stuck. Message: overthinking can paralyze action. Some things are best done naturally, not analyzed to death. There's wisdom in reflection, but sometimes peace lies in letting go and just moving forward. The story: choosing a friend. One day, 3 disciples came to Socrates and asked, Master, how can we find the ideal friend? Socrates didn't answer directly. Instead, he pointed them toward a vast field of wheat and said, Each of you go and pick the largest stalk of wheat you can find. But there's a rule. You may only walk forward, no turning back, and you can pick only once. The first disciple eagerly entered the field. After just a few steps, he saw a stalk that looked large and beautiful. Fearing he might miss the chance, he picked it immediately. But as he continued walking, he saw many stalks that were even bigger. Regret filled him, and he finished the walk unsatisfied. The second disciple, learning from the first, took a cautious approach. Every time he saw a large stalk, he hesitated, thinking there might be a better one ahead. But by the time he reached the end of the field, he had nothing in his hands. His chance had passed. The third disciple reflected on both mistakes. During the first third of his walk, he observed and studied the stalks, learning what was available. In the next third, he tested that knowledge. And in the final stretch, he selected one stalk, not necessarily the biggest or most perfect, but one that was both good and satisfying. He finished his walk with a calm smile. Message: perfection is an illusion when it comes to relationships. If you rush to grab the first thing that seems good, you may regret it later. If you wait endlessly, searching for something flawless, you may miss every opportunity. But with wisdom, patience, and understanding, you can make a choice that, though not perfect, is meaningful and fulfilling. In life and in friendship, it's not about finding the best, but about finding what's right for you. The story: the prisoner who knew his fault. In a prison where many serious offenders were held, the inmates were once given a chance to read magazines during a recreation hour. One prisoner, flipping through a jewelry magazine, paused at a photo of an expensive necklace and sighed, "My mother would look so beautiful wearing this." Another, reading a home decor magazine, said wistfully, "If my mother lived in a house like this, she'd be so happy." A third, lost in a car magazine, murmured, "If my mother had a car like this, she could visit me more often." Then, one man sat quietly for a long time with a magazine in his hands. He didn't say a word, until suddenly tears began to stream down his face. His voice cracked as he whispered, "If only my mother had a good son." At that moment, the room fell into silence. Every prisoner lowered their gaze, the weight of those words pressing into their hearts. Message: true remorse doesn't come from wishing for what we could give, but from realizing what we've taken away. Owning one's mistakes requires deep courage, and sometimes the greatest gift we can give to those we love is the commitment to change who we are. The story: the secret. There was once an old man who sold fish. His business thrived. Customers flocked to buy from him, praising his fish as the freshest, the tastiest, the best in town. Other fish sellers were baffled. They caught their fish from the same waters, stored them in the same kind of tanks, and even used the same river water to keep them fresh. Yet somehow, the old man's fish were always a cut above. One day, the old man went on a short trip. Seizing the opportunity, the other fishermen decided to inspect his tank, hoping to uncover his secret. When they opened it, they were puzzled at first. His tank was no different from theirs. But then they noticed something odd, a single large, fierce fish thrashing about inside. After some thought, the truth became clear. That aggressive fish, constantly swimming and stirring the water, kept the others in constant motion. The smaller fish had no chance to rest. They had to stay active, alert, always moving. This constant movement preserved their vitality and freshness, giving their flesh a superior texture and taste. Message: comfort breeds stagnation. Pressure, challenge, even a bit of chaos. These are the forces that keep us sharp, strong, and at our best. Just like the fish forced to swim to survive, we grow through motion and struggle. Sometimes it takes a bit of discomfort to bring out the finest version of ourselves. The story: the 1 millionth stone. There was once a man who spent a long time searching for precious stones along a riverbank. Day after day, he picked up stone after stone, but found nothing of value. Exhausted and discouraged, his body aching and spirit worn, he slumped down on a rock jutting out by the river and sighed to his friend beside him. "Look at this. I've picked up 999,999 stones and still not a single gem. I'm done. I give up." His friend chuckled and said half-jokingly, "Well, why not make it an even million? Just one more stone for the record." The man, still disheartened, reached down without much thought and grabbed another stone from the river. But as he lifted it, he noticed something. This stone felt heavier. Curious, he examined it closely, and his eyes widened in disbelief. It was a gem. Message: the treasure we seek may lie just one step beyond the point we choose to quit. Life often tests us right before rewarding us. True perseverance means holding on, even when you're tired, even when you've lost count. Because sometimes the 1 millionth stone is the one that changes everything. The story: true nature. The daughter of a wealthy landowner fell deeply in love with a poor young man. When she told her father about him, the landowner agreed to meet the young man and asked his daughter to bring him home to introduce to the family. Excited, she shared the news with her beloved. But instead of joy, the young man grew anxious. He came from poverty. He didn't even own a proper set of clothes. In the end, it was the landowner's daughter who had to prepare everything for him, including the fine clothes he would wear. On the day of the meeting, the young man arrived with excitement and nervousness. He looked handsome and confident in his borrowed attire. At first, the landowner was impressed by his appearance and demeanor, but soon a frown formed on his face. Though the clothes were expensive, they lacked the fragrance that fine garments usually carried. It became clear to the landowner that the outfit wasn't the young man's own. When his daughter and wife stepped away to wash their hands, the landowner took the opportunity to speak to the young man in private. "These clothes, they aren't really yours, are they?" The young man blushed, then nodded silently. The landowner said, "We know your background well, and I understand why you dressed like this tonight, to please us, to avoid embarrassment. But in doing so, you didn't just change your appearance, you denied who you are. I'm not afraid of poverty. What I fear most is wealth without honesty. A man who rejects his own nature, how can he stand strong in society? And if I were to give you my daughter's hand in marriage, how could I ever be at peace?" His words were blunt, even harsh, like a splash of cold water straight to the young man's heart. He was deeply ashamed, but he never forgot that moment. The dinner turned into a life lesson. From that day on, the young man abandoned all vanity. He chose to live with honesty and authenticity. Years passed. After the landowner and his wife passed away, their daughter and her husband inherited everything. Yet instead of living lavishly, they gave the wealth away to society, building schools, supporting public works, and helping those in need. Eventually, the couple became even wealthier than her parents had ever been. Still, they lived humbly, never chasing luxury, for they had long understood one simple truth. True happiness is living honestly, embracing who you are, and never losing sight of your true self. The story: life's magic. A wealthy young man was deeply in love with a high-class young lady. She was not only beautiful, but also stylish, living a life of luxury. He adored her completely and did everything she asked without hesitation. One day before their engagement, he asked her, "What kind of engagement gift would you like?" She replied honestly, "I'd love a diamond ring." So the young man went out and bought a precious diamond ring and gave it to her. Meanwhile, another young man, born into a poor family, was in love with a modest girl. She wasn't stunning, but she was hardworking and knew how to live simply. On the day before their engagement, he asked, "What would you like me to give you?" The girl smiled and said, "Just a crystal ring will do." He spent a few coins to buy a small crystal ring, and she was genuinely delighted. 20 years later, the first couple had squandered nearly all their wealth. Their once lavish lifestyle had collapsed, and even the diamond ring had long been sold. On the woman's finger now sat a simple crystal ring. The second couple, through years of effort, thrift, and steady work, had slowly built a comfortable life. The old crystal ring had been replaced by a real diamond, and their life was filled with joy and fulfillment. Message: life works like magic. Time transforms everything. 20 years can change crystal into diamond or turn diamonds into glass. The choices and values we hold today shape our tomorrow. True wealth lies not in what we start with, but in how we grow, love, and endure. The story: Half a Mat. There was once a man who, after getting married, had a son whom he loved dearly. However, he harbored a deep resentment toward his own aging father. The old man was frail and slow, often stumbling about, doing little besides eating and smoking. To the younger man, he had become nothing but a burden. One day, the man told his wife, "Let's send the old man to live outside." His wife pleaded with him not to cast his father out, but he refused to listen. Left with no choice, she quietly said, "Then at least give him a mat to take with him." The man considered giving his father only half a mat, though outwardly he replied, "Fine, give him a mat." Just then, their little boy spoke up. "Dad, don't give Grandpa the whole mat. Just give him half and save the other half. Keep it safe, because when I grow up, you'll need it too, for when it's your turn to live outside." The child's words struck fear into the father's heart. In that moment, he realized the brutal truth. If he cast out his father today, he would only be teaching his son how to treat him tomorrow. Trembling, he immediately called his father back into the house. Message: how we treat our elders teaches our children how to treat us. Disrespect and neglect echo through generations, while compassion and care create a legacy of love. What we do today becomes tomorrow's example. The story: the source of strength. In a small town, there lived a poor little boy. Each day, he wandered the streets and alleys begging for food. Yet, despite his thin frame and ragged clothes, he possessed extraordinary strength. When the king's elephant passed through town, the boy would grab its tail, and miraculously, the elephant couldn't move. He would even climb atop the elephant, performing antics that made the townspeople burst into laughter. This spectacle deeply embarrassed the king. How could a mere beggar boy reduce his royal elephant to a sideshow? Furious and humiliated, the king summoned his ministers. "We must find a way to deal with this boy," he declared. "His strength is an insult to my dignity. I dread traveling through that town, but I can't banish him. He could appear anywhere, grab the tail of my elephant, and stop it again. I want that strength taken from him." One minister offered a suggestion. "But, Your Majesty, he is only a beggar. If he had a shop to run or school to attend, his energy would be drained. But as it stands, he has no worries. He eats when people feed him, sleeps when he wants, plays all day, and lives without responsibility or stress. That's why he's always happy and strangely strong. It won't be easy to take that strength away." Then one day, a wise man came to the court with an idea. "Give the boy a job," he said. "Tell him that if he agrees to do a simple task, just lighting a lamp in the village temple each evening, he will be paid 1 gold rupee a day." One minister objected. "But won't that only make him stronger? He'll eat better and won't need to beg anymore." The wise man smiled. "Don't worry. Just do as I say." So the boy was offered the job. Delighted by the promise of a daily gold rupee, he accepted. Each evening at sunset, he lit the temple lamp without fail. But by the second week, something had changed. When the king once again passed through the town, the boy, out of habit, ran up to grab the elephant's tail. Yet this time, he failed. The elephant dragged him along without effort. His strength had faded. Message: strength doesn't always come from food or exercise. It often comes from freedom, joy, and a carefree spirit. The burdens of duty, the weight of expectation, even the smallest responsibility can slowly chip away at one's energy. What we gain in gold, we may lose in vitality. Sometimes the truest strength lies in living light and free. The story: Hercules and the Cart Driver. A cart driver was traveling down a muddy road with a wagon piled high with goods. After a while, one of the wheels sank deep into the muck, and the horses couldn't pull it free. The driver stood there, unsure of what to do, looking around helplessly. Every now and then he called out to the mighty Hercules, hoping the legendary hero would appear and save him. Eventually, Hercules did appear. He looked at the man and said, "Put your shoulder to the wheel, then strike your horses with the whip. That way, they'll be able to pull the cart out of the mud. But if you just stand there shouting my name, you'll never move forward, and no one else can help you either." Message: even divine strength is useless to those who won't help themselves. The heavens may offer support, but real progress begins with your own effort. Relying on others without action leads nowhere. Help yourself first. Only then can help truly reach you. The story: Happiness and the Two Drops of Oil. A young man, longing to uncover the secret of true happiness, embarked on a journey that led him across mountains, rivers, and deserts. After much hardship, he finally arrived at a magnificent city where a renowned wise man was said to live. Entering the bustling city, the young man marveled at what he saw: merchants laughing and trading goods, musicians performing in the grand square, and tables overflowing with delicious food. But he didn't linger long. He was eager to find the wise man and ask his question. When he found the sage, he immediately expressed his desire to learn the meaning of happiness. The wise man listened, then handed him a spoon filled with soup in which floated 2 small drops of oil. "Take this spoon," the wise man said, "and walk around the city, but be careful, do not spill even a single drop of oil." The young man obeyed and carefully made his way through the city, eyes fixed on the spoon. When he returned, the sage asked, "So, what did you see along the way?" The young man shook his head. "Nothing, really. I was too focused on not spilling the oil." The wise man smiled and said, "Very well. Now go again, but this time observe everything, every tree, every flower, every person." The young man set out once more. This time he soaked in every detail: the vibrant colors, the music, the joyful faces, the beauty of life itself. But when he returned, the 2 drops of oil were gone. The wise man looked at him and said, "You see, true happiness is when you can embrace the richness of the world around you. But never forget the 2 drops of oil in your spoon." Message: happiness is not about shutting out the world to protect what you value, nor is it about losing yourself in distractions and forgetting your responsibilities. True happiness lies in balance, being fully present to the beauty of life, while still holding carefully to the things that matter most. The story: the meal money. A farmer and a gambler entered a roadside eatery, each choosing a separate table. The gambler ordered a plate of vegetables, a pot of wine, and several steamed buns. He quickly drank the wine, devoured 2 buns, and barely touched the vegetables. After finishing his meal, he pulled out a $100 note and handed it to the waitress, then stood up to leave. The waitress called after him, "Sir, wait! You've given me $10 too much." The gambler replied loudly, "Keep it. That's for you." Not long after, the farmer finished his simple meal: some vegetables, a bowl of soup, and a portion of rice. He ate everything carefully, even placing the last ball of rice into the vegetable dish to soak up the remaining oil. He didn't leave a single grain behind. Then, after swallowing the final bite, he called out, "Miss, you still owe me $2 in change." A student of Socrates, who had been observing everything, turned to his teacher and remarked, "That farmer is so stingy, but the other man, he's generous." Socrates gently shook his head and said, "The farmer's money came from sweat and toil. What did the gambler's money come from?" Message: don't judge generosity by appearances. True value lies in the source of what is given, not in how much is shown. Money earned through hard work holds a different weight than money thrown away from excess. What seems like stinginess may be respect for labor. What appears as generosity may be carelessness in disguise. The story, the God statue. At the crossroads at the edge of a village stood a small shrine housing a wooden statue of a deity. Over the years, the shrine had been neglected. Layers of dust coated its surface, and no one came to offer incense or prayers anymore. One day, a traveler passed by and found his way blocked by a large ditch. Frustrated at the sudden obstacle, he blamed the deity for placing the ditch in his path. In anger, he stormed into the shrine, overturned the altar, and threw the wooden statue into the muddy water below. Later, another passerby saw the statue lying in the ditch. Feeling sorry, he gently lifted it out, cleaned it thoroughly, and respectfully returned it to the altar. However, not long after, he began to suffer from painful headaches that lasted for 2 full weeks. Puzzled, the local spirit scribe approached the deity and asked, "Why is it that the man who threw you into the water went unpunished, while the one who respectfully restored you was made to suffer?" The deity replied with a sigh, "You don't understand. Only kind people are easy to punish." Message: the world can be unjust where kindness is mistaken for weakness and wrongdoing goes unchecked. But this irony reveals a deeper truth. Often, the gentle and good-hearted bear the weight of consequences, not because they deserve it, but because they're the easiest to reach. Let it be a reminder not only to be kind, but also to be wise. For virtue must be paired with strength to avoid being taken for granted.